Broadcast Center in Los Angeles, this is KCAL9 News at 9.
The monster storm as seen from space, Hurricane Florence is taking direct aim at the Carolinas, but some people say they're not able to evacuate.
And White House advisor Stephen Miller, known for his hardline immigration views, is being criticized by his former rabbi in Santa Monica. We'll speak to the rabbi.
And the head of the most successful television news program in history has been fired by CBS News. See this stunning text message he sent that ended his career.
Hello everyone, I'm Juan Fernandez.
And I'm Crystal Cruz. Hurricane Florence is barreling toward the Carolinas tonight. Landfall could come in just 24 hours, and at this time more than 1 million people are under mandatory evacuation orders.
Some people are racing against the clock after initially hoping to ride out the storm, but others say they're unable to leave. Correspondent Drew Griffin reports from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
The southward track hit the South Carolina coast with a sudden reality check. Already preparing for what might have been a glancing blow, Myrtle Beach and Point South woke up in Florence's crosshairs.
It was like waking up to a sucker punch, and we need to take this very seriously. This storm is massive. It's catastrophic, and I don't say that to create panic, but I say it to create a sense of urgency that people do need to take action and evacuate.
Evacuation routes turned all lanes one way, away from the coast. A steady stream of last-minute evacuees trying to get as far as possible to ride out a storm that could last for days.
Disaster is at the doorstep and is coming in. If you're on the coast, there is still time to get out safely. No possession is worth your life.
In North Carolina's Barrier Islands, 2 ferries full of residents of Ocracoke Island were some of the last to leave. More than 1 million facing mandatory evacuation orders are making one last decision: leave or ride it out.
If we leave, it could be weeks, a month until you can come back and check on your home. I mean, that in itself is scary, to be away from your home for that long. So we boarded up the house. We have plenty of water. We have plenty of food. We're all just gonna, stick in it together and hope for the best.
In Myrtle Beach, final boards went up this morning on Christine Rush's apartment building. She thought she was staying, then reluctantly looked at Florence's new path.
Oh, I didn't know it until you told me and my husband told me, so yeah, we're leaving. We're going further off of the beach.
Her biggest problem, her dog Peyton. She won't leave without him. Shelters in her county don't accept pets. She has a friend on higher ground. Her neighbors, she says, aren't so lucky.
Some of them just don't have any place to go. I mean, some of these people in here don't have vehicles. They have like bicycles or mopeds or something like that. I mean, they cannot leave.
Officials say the lack of huge traffic jams today shows people have already heeded the warnings. Up and down the coast, a final warning was being broadcast today. Stay at your own peril.
Emergency services are going to be discontinued. There will be no police. There will be no fire. There'll be no ambulance service. We are an independent lot here in Horry County. That said, protect your loved ones.
And that was Drew Griffin reporting from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The city declared a curfew that started at 10 p.m. tonight.
And Evelyn Taft joins us now. She's talking about all these hurricanes and all this action that's happening on the East Coast. Evelyn.
Crystal, Juan, as we get a look outside right now, calm conditions here at home. And of course, we'll get back to that. We want to get right to the hurricane as we get a look at your tropical satellite. We've got hurricane warnings up and down the entire coast through North Carolina and South Carolina. Currently, the storm is fluctuating between a Category 3 and about to get down to Category 2. So winds between 110 and 130 miles per hour. Looks like we will be making landfall as a Category 2 storm. So that's already better than the Category 3 or Category 4 we originally anticipated. And here's a closer look at the forecast models, what's called the spaghetti model. They're now in agreement, the forecast track. The other day, they're sort of all doing their own thing. There's just one forecast track that's projected to go to the northeast, but doesn't look like that's going to be the case. You'll see most of the agreement is right here, so making direct landfall along the North Carolina coastline, continuing on into South Carolina. Carolina before becoming a tropical depression. So, of course, we will continue to track Florence for you. The flooding, the rain, the storm surge, could see storm surge up to 13 feet in some areas. So very drastic. Again, we will continue to bring the latest to you here. Otherwise, we want to check in with current conditions here at home. You'll see a little bit of fog along the coast. Otherwise, we are looking at clear conditions, mild conditions at the moment. Numbers mostly in the 60s and 70s, and wind speeds mostly calm. Just a little breezier for Lancaster and for Apple Valley this evening. Earlier today, we got up to 81 downtown, average being 84, record number is 102. So we were slightly below average for this time of year. Tonight, we're down to the 60s with low clouds. By the afternoon, sunny and breezy. We're up to 80 degrees. As we get a look at your futurecast here, you will see low pressure continuing to hang out to the north. That's what's bringing temperatures down just by a couple degrees, keeping the marine layer intact, high pressure to the east. And as we get a look at the rest of our forecast, you will notice we are expecting to see, again, a little bit of a warm up as low pressure starts to back off and a little ridge builds over us. 70s, 80s, 90s over the next 7 days with that marine layer in the overnight morning hours. For the IE high desert in the mountains, we're looking at the 80s and 90s, the high desert in the 90s, and the mountains in the 70s and 80s for the next 7 days, getting warmer through the weekend and cooler slightly by next week. Juan and Crystal, back to you.
All right, Evelyn, thank you. Another storm is in the news tonight. For the second time in less than a month, a tropical storm is hitting Hawaii.
Tropical storm Olivia just blew across Maui and Oahu. Olivia is the first tropical storm to ever make landfall on Maui. It weakened significantly before making landfall, and top winds are only 40 miles an hour right now. 8 inches of rain could fall.
Olivia made landfall twice, first on Maui's coast, then on Lanai's coast. The power was knocked out for thousands of people in Maui and Oahu.
Torrents of rain fell on the sparsely populated windward side of Maui. This is the Waihi River, raging as it comes down from the mountains and drains into the ocean. Now, we've not heard tonight if this house survived.
Now, this is the view high above Pearl Harbor late today on a time lapse. Bands of heavy rain sweeping over the naval base. Look at the winds dragging the surface waters along with them. Lots of power outages as well in that area, but no reports of any serious damage or injuries tonight.
2, 1.
And this may not be the best way to ride out a tropical storm. Devin Miller went cliff jumping on Oahu's north shore as Olivia blew in. Look at him right there. Ooh. And we'll continue to monitor conditions on the islands tonight and, of course, bring you any updates as we get them.
A very unusual smackdown tonight for one of President Trump's top aides. Stephen Miller is the architect of many of Donald Trump's hardline policies on immigration.
And he's from Santa Monica, and his childhood rabbi just called him out for bashing immigrants. KCAL9 political reporter Dave Bryan joins us with the details.
Stephen Miller is not a high-profile guy. He's not on camera a lot, but behind the scenes, he is extremely influential. This week and next week are among the most important weeks on the Jewish calendar, with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and next week Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the crowds of worshipers in the synagogues are the largest of the year. But no matter what the timing, one thing for sure, you don't want to be called out by your hometown rabbi or preacher or priest, and that's what happened this week to senior presidential advisor Stephen Miller. When the congregation at Beth Shur Shalom Synagogue in Santa Monica sang out this week in celebration of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, it was a celebration with a strong message from Rabbi Neil Comas Daniels. He says when presidential advisor Stephen Miller was a child, his family was briefly members of the congregation. But there were groans when Rabbi Comas Daniels began his sermon reading a letter to Stephen Miller.
A letter to Stephen Miller, senior advisor to the president. Dear Stephen Miller.
Miller, who is Jewish, grew up in Santa Monica and attended Santa Monica High School. And today he plays a major role in the Trump administration. The New York Times reports Miller is a key designer of President Donald Trump's hardline immigration policies, including the zero-tolerance policy that led to the separation of families who illegally crossed the U.S. border. In his Rosh Hashanah sermon, Rabbi Comas Daniels called him out on that, saying, from the Jewish perspective, the parent-child relationship is sacrosanct. Disrupting it is cruel. Mr. Miller, The policy that you helped to conceive and put into practice is cruel. The zero-tolerance policy is completely antithetical to everything I know about Judaism, Jewish law, and Jewish values.
My issue is that I identify as a Jew and my congregation identifies as Jews, and that we therefore have to take up this moral slack that has this moral void that is now gaping in front of us, that we need to fill it up with justice.
In defending the zero-tolerance policies, Miller said this to the New York Times. It was a simple decision by the administration to have a zero-tolerance policy for illegal entry, period. The message is that no one is exempt from immigration law. Rabbi Comas Daniels says Miller was about 9 years old when his family joined the congregation for a year or two, but the policies he's promulgating now are not consistent with what he was taught in Hebrew school.
When a Jew is in charge of something like this, and in fact is in some ways an architect of this kind of a policy, I think what was so striking is that when you lay out Jewish values about this issue, it becomes almost inconceivable that someone who knows these values could then go ahead and construct a policy like this and put it into action.
In his sermon, the rabbi said, "Honestly, Mr. Miller, you've set back the Jewish contribution to making the world spiritually whole. You can choose to accept responsibility for the havoc you've wrought and the wounds you've inflicted, or not." The criticism from his hometown Jewish community, including one of Miller's own uncles, might be stinging rebuttal. But not all Jews have been critical of him. In fact, some more politically conservative Orthodox Jews applaud Miller and the Trump administration for taking a strong stand in support of Israel, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and cutting off contact and funding to some Palestinian entities. But Miller has become a hot issue in some quarters of the Jewish community. The editor-in-chief of the Jewish news organization Forward wrote in an editorial column in June that Miller's immigration separation policies are totally unethical and intolerable, saying to Miller, "You are not one of us, not when you promulgate dehumanizing policies that violate Jewish values." Now, I mentioned Stephen Miller's uncle in the report. His name is David Glosser. He recently wrote a piece for Politico in which he said he watched with dismay and increasing horror as his nephew, Stephen Miller, became the architect of immigration policies that repudiate the very foundation of his family's life in this country. Like many Jews who fled persecution in Eastern Europe, Miller's ancestors immigrated to the U.S. in the early 1900s to build a new life. Juan, back to you.
All right, Dave, thank you. Now to a developing news out of China. A driver rammed a car into a crowd, killing 9 people. The terrifying scene played out in a busy square in Hengyang today. 46 people were also hurt in the attack. The Chinese government calls the attack deliberate. The driver has been arrested.
And the head of the most successful television news program in history fired by CBS News. Up next, see the stunning text message he sent that ended his career.
And President Trump claims FEMA's recovery effort in Puerto Rico was a success. Today we got this video, 20,000 pallets of bottled water sitting in Puerto Rico. It was never given out to people who deliberately or desperately needed it.
And MGM Resorts made headlines for suing the victims of the Las Vegas mass shooting. Now, MGM offering them a deal.
CBS News today fired longtime 60 Minutes executive producer Jeff Fager. He had been with the network for more than 30 years.
Correspondent Jerika Duncan has details on the controversial text message that led to his dismissal.
Jeff Fager, the executive producer of the oldest and most successful news magazine program in history, 60 Minutes, was fired from CBS News this afternoon. In its more than 50 years on air, only 2 people have led that broadcast. Fager succeeded the show's creator, Don Hewitt, in 2004. Fager also recently served as the chairman of the CBS News division.
When we cover a story and report it on Sunday night and it has impact on Monday morning, that's what you hope for.
Fager hired Charlie Rose for multiple roles at the network. In November, Rose was terminated. This July, 6 female former CBS employees told The New Yorker Fager would touch employees in ways that made them uncomfortable after drinking at office parties. 19 current and former employees told The New Yorker Fager allowed harassment in the division. Fager vehemently denied all of those claims. Fager continued to come to work. On Sunday, The New Yorker reported a new accuser said she felt compelled to speak because she simply can't believe Fager is back there. The article described her as a producer who was an intern at CBS in the early 2000s who said that he groped her at a work party. In response to that allegation, Fager told CBS News, "This is an outrageous claim, and it didn't happen. It is wrong." Fager's departure comes days after CBS chairman and CEO Leslie Moonves resigned following allegations of sexual assault and harassment. We caught up with CBS News president David Rhodes today after he briefed the 60 Minutes staff.
Can't talk to you guys about this today.
In a statement today, Rhodes said Fager's dismissal is not directly related to the allegations surfaced in press reports, which continue to be investigated independently. However, he violated company policy, and it is our commitment to uphold those policies. Through his attorney, Fager told CBS News, "They terminated my contract early because I sent a text message to one of our own CBS reporters demanding that she be fair in covering the story. My language was harsh. CBS did not like it."
I am that reporter. Since Jeff Fager publicly referred to our exchange today, I want to be transparent about it. First, here's some background. Sunday evening, I reached out to Fager for comment on the articles alleging he groped or touched CBS employees at company parties. In addition to denying these charges, Fager in a text said, quote, "If you repeat these false accusations without any of your own reporting to back them up, you will be held responsible for harming me." He went on to say, "Be careful. There are people who lost their jobs trying to harm me, and if you pass on these damaging claims without your own reporting to back them up, that will become a serious problem." 60 Minutes will enter its 51st season under the leadership of executive editor Bill Owens, while the search for a new executive producer begins. Sharika Duncan, CBS News, New York.
KCAL9 is owned by the CBS Corporation.
Pope Francis is summoning bishops from around the world to Rome for a summit to talk about clergy sex abuse. The meetings will be held next February. The church and the Pope have been criticized for the way they've handled the scandal. Pope Francis is accused of protecting a top American cardinal who was accused of molestation. The Archbishop of Washington, D.C. says he is going to Rome soon to meet with the Pope and talk about his potential resignation. Cardinal Donald Wuerl is being pressured to step down because of accusations he covered up for predator priests. He led the Pittsburgh Diocese for 18 years and was implicated in a recent grand jury report in Pennsylvania. CNN reports he will push for the Pope to accept his resignation.
10 years ago tonight, a Metrolink engineer's mistake cost 25 people their lives in Chatsworth. On the anniversary of the Metrolink crash, the families of the victims gathered with executives and politicians to honor those killed in the crash. In attendance, Tina Mosley. Mosley lost her mother, Beverly, in the tragedy. She says despite losing her best friend, the event created another family for her.
The first responders, to hear what they went through, their PTSD. I mean, so you do feel sort of like that community, whereas when you walk, you're home by yourself every day, walking alone, it is comforting to come together and say, we're not alone. This was a community event, even though it affected us personally.
At the ceremony, Metrolink executives praised new safety technology, including automatic braking, to make sure a disaster never happens again.
For days, Russia has claimed it doesn't know the men accused by Britain of being behind a chemical weapons attack. Well, suddenly today, President Putin says he knows who they are. We'll have a report from Moscow.
And could President Donald Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, soon cooperate with Robert Mueller's Russia probe? There's signs Manafort's looking to make a deal.
MGM is offering a deal to victims of the mass shooting in Las Vegas. The company is being criticized for offering to donate the money used to serve them legal notices to a charity. MGM sued more than 1,900 victims in July. It offered to make a $500 donation for each person who waives being served with those lawsuits. One victim's lawyer calls it nonsense and also says MGM is just trying to save money. Stephen Paddock killed 58 people before taking his own life. More than 800 others were hurt.
Before Equifax's infamous data hack, the company was worried about Chinese spies. This, according to the Wall Street Journal. Sources said an ex-worker was investigated by Equifax and the FBI. Now, the worker left to work for Ant Financial in China. He denied any data theft. Investigators apparently also found messages from Ant recruiters that offered ethnically Chinese employees big salaries to jump ship with Equifax information. Equifax apparently got so worried at one point it started monitoring its ethnically Chinese employees. Investigators believe this investigation contributed to Equifax's delayed reaction to the 2017 hack.
Next at 9, this week marks 10 years since the start of the Great Recession. But the remarkable recovery has left some Americans behind. You'll meet them coming up.
North Korea's dictator is changing his diplomatic strategy as another major U.S. ally seeks a summit.
Lakers owner Jeannie Buss talks about LeBron James and the purple and gold. Jamie Maggio has the details next in sports.
Welcome back. I'm Jamie Maggio with sports. Lots of anticipation for Lakers fans going into this season after the arrival of LeBron James. Earlier today, our Jim Hill spoke with owner Jeannie Buss about Magic Johnson's role in recruiting King James.
I knew that Magic would. He was the right person to connect with LeBron and explain to him what the Lakers are all about. I mean, he is the epitome of what being a Laker is. And he's also from, kind of the same area, the Midwest, and moved to Los Angeles and made LA his home. So he really had all the right, things to talk to LeBron about.
Going back to July 1st, when LeBron said he would become a member of the Lakers. Mm-hmm. I'm told you had a smile on your face then, and it hasn't left. That same smile is here to this day.
I haven't stopped smiling. I'm so happy. I can't wait till that first game.
Well, the Dodgers tried to avoid a season sweep against the Reds in Cincinnati. The Dodgers began the day a game and a half behind the first place Rockies, tied at 1 in the fourth when Yasmani Grandal hits one deep to right center. A young fan reaches over the wall and catches it. Hey, that's fan interference. So Grandal ends up at second, but Max Muncy does score from first for a 2-1 lead. Then in the fifth, with runners on second and third, Justin Turner hits a single up the middle. Yasiel Puig will score easily. The throw comes home, and Jock Peterson just gets in under the tag. Dodgers go on to win 8-1. And it's a short week for the Rams following Monday night's season-opening win against the Raiders. Sean McVay's team will host the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday.
Division game at home, we're excited about it, and anytime that you get a chance to play and play for games that count, you can't help but get excited, and you want to do your best to try to come away with the goal.
Make it 2 in a row. Let's go. Coming up on Sports Central, more from Jeannie Buss, and Usain Bolt runs in zero gravity. Those details at 10:45.
Families in the Carolinas have seen it before. A storm floods their neighborhoods, so some have tried to move out, but the government left them behind. Their story's next.
President Trump claims FEMA's recovery effort in Puerto Rico was a success. Well, today we got this video, 20,000 pallets of bottled water sitting in Puerto Rico. It was never handed out to people who desperately needed it.
And stunning allegations tonight about President Donald Trump. As Trump Tower was being built decades ago, he allegedly tried to get an architect to break the law.
Live from the Broadcast Center in Los Angeles, this is KCAL9 News at 9.
Welcome back. I'm Juan Fernandez.
And I'm Crystal Cruz. As the East Coast prepares for Hurricane Florence, the threat extends far inland.
Fayetteville, North Carolina is 2 hours from the ocean, but it's still expecting as much as 20 inches of rain. People in the area tried to move out after previous storms, but found themselves stuck. Correspondent DeMarco Morgan is there.
Sisters Bree and Ashlyn McGee are starting to worry.
Right now, we just aren't really sure what to do.
They are expecting the worst because they've lived this nightmare before. 2 years ago, Hurricane Matthew inundated their neighborhood. Nearby, a small dam burst and sent floodwaters pouring in, And now Florence is poised to deliver 4 months worth of rainfall in just 3 days. Lumberton, 30 minutes south of Fayetteville, is where Matthew did its worst. The fear is that low-lying areas like this one will be no match for Florence. After Matthew, Fayetteville encouraged 600 residents in flood-prone areas to apply for a federal relief program that would elevate or even buy out qualified homes. More than 200 families applied, but fewer than 25 were approved for buyouts, according to the city. Al Miller's application was denied last year.
Then we got a letter saying, sorry, the money's not there.
So you did everything that you were supposed to do to find out the money's not there.
The money did not come through.
His property floods routinely, and he blames rapid development upstream of the creek that runs behind his house. The water has nowhere to go.
At this time, your home does not meet the selection criteria for inclusion.
The McGees were rejected too, leaving their father Dave resigned to the fate of Florence.
The first thing is just to make sure we're safe.
Now, many of the residents that we spoke with, like Dave, say they are planning to move to higher ground, but the frustration continues. Remember that busted dam that we just showed you? Take a look at this. 2 years later, and nothing's been done to fix it. DeMarco Morgan, CBS News, Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Meteorologist Evelyn Taft now joins us with a check on Florence. Evelyn.
Crystal, Juan, as we get a look at Florence right now, let's get right to those hurricane warnings, and you'll see red highlighting the coast. Even further inland, we were under hurricane watches. Now hurricane warnings. Charleston under hurricane watch, but as we head northward along the North Carolina coastline and part of the South Carolina coastline, we're looking at hurricane warnings in effect through Friday. Again, this point, Florence making landfall as soon as tomorrow afternoon. Take a look, fluctuating from a Category 3 now to a Category 2. You'll see 130-mile-per-hour winds, and as it makes landfall, looks like Florence will continue at a Category 2 upon landfall, turning into Category 1, but still wreaking major havoc. We are talking, again, very windy conditions, major storm surge up to 13 feet, and of course, serious wind with this. So some serious damage expected, very significant. The spaghetti models now in agreement. We saw different forecast tracks originally, but as we get closer to landfall, models are in agreement that it will make its way to the North Carolina coastline before continuing into South Carolina right there. So you'll see a closer look at what we're contending with over the next couple of days. As we switch gears and take a look at our forecast here at home, you will see a little bit of fog. Otherwise, we are looking at clear conditions tonight, mild conditions as well, 60s and 70s. 72 Fullerton, 72 Ontario, 70 Corona. Wind-wise, 15-mile-per-hour winds for Apple Valley, 11 for Lancaster. 81 earlier today downtown, average being 84, and record numbers 101. 64 earlier today, actually later tonight. Earlier today, we were in the 80s, and then we're going to make it to the 80s again as we head into tomorrow's sunny and breezy conditions. So here we have it, your futurecast showing you low pressure to the north, high pressure to the west, to the east, actually. Eventually, it's going to build over Southern California and bring in warmer numbers. But again, nothing too significant. The forecast really staying pretty much in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s over the next few days. And you'll see that right here for the beaches, the basin, and the valleys. Overnight morning low clouds, and you'll see sunshine by the afternoon. As we check in with the IE, the high desert, and the mountains, 80s and 90s expected, the high desert in the 90s, mountains in the 70s and 80s for the next 7 days. Juan and Crystal, back to you.
All right, Evelyn, thanks. The White House is facing questions about how it will respond to Hurricane Florence.
The administration has faced criticism over the way it handled last year's devastation in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Maria. This video emerged today. 20,000 pallets of bottled water are stacked at an airport runway in Puerto Rico. FEMA brought in the water in the aftermath of Maria. Most of it's remained untouched, and critics say this is another example of the U.S. government's poor response. Here's correspondent Caitlin Collins.
The White House tonight bracing for Hurricane Florence as it barrels toward the East Coast, with President Trump warning that the storm will be even bigger than anticipated and extremely dangerous.
We are sparing no expense.
Trump asserting his administration is fully prepared.
We're ready. We're as ready as anybody's ever been.
As he faces criticism for bragging once again about the government's response to Hurricane Maria, which devastated Puerto Rico last year and killed nearly 3,000 people. Trump writing on Twitter today it was an unappreciated great job as he leveled new attacks at the mayor of San Juan, accusing her of being totally incompetent. Those comments coming after Mayor Carmen Yulin Cruz, who has butted heads with the president in the past, said this on CNN.
The president just keeps adding insult to injury, and I think his words are despicable. He thinks that 3,000 people dying on his watch is a good news story or is an unsung success. You know, nobody's going to be singing his praises.
Hurricane Florence giving Trump a second chance at being the consoler in chief, after he was widely criticized for actions critics said were tone deaf when he visited Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. All this as Senator Jeff Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon, released a document showing nearly $10 million in FEMA funding, less than 1% of its overall budget, were transferred to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement earlier this year for detention and deportation efforts.
I'm simply saying it'll have $10 million less than it would have, and $10 million is significant.
FEMA Administrator Brock Long insisting that money didn't come from the Disaster Relief Fund and won't affect relief efforts.
Does not come out of the disaster relief fund that funds everything behind me, that funds everything in the field. So it's a non-issue for us at this moment.
And that was Caitlin Collins reporting. A FEMA official warned people on the Carolina coast that today is the last good day to evacuate ahead of Hurricane Florence.
Could Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort soon cooperate with Robert Mueller's Russia probe? There are signs he's looking to make a deal.
And North Korea's dictator is changing his diplomatic strategy as another major U.S. ally seeks a summit. We'll have a report from Pyongyang.
And be sure to switch over to CBS 2 tonight at 11. A car without the commitment. 2 on your side checks out a new car subscription service that just arrived right here in Los Angeles. This week marks a decade since the start of the Great Recession. The financial firm Lehman Brothers collapsed 10 years ago this Saturday.
The U.S. economy has recovered since then, but some of those worst hit in the crash have not. Here's correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan.
September 2008 and the U.S. stock market is sent into a panic after the collapse of the investment bank Lehman Brothers. These images of staff leaving with boxes are a reminder of the day confidence in Wall Street turned to crisis. Main Street America was hit hard. Across the country, millions lost their homes and unemployment skyrocketed. And here in the country's smallest state, Rhode Island, some of the biggest impact was felt, with more than 1 in 10 people left out of work. So what's changed a decade on? At the height of the recession, we met Holly Heyman, a mother of 5 who'd lost her business, her home, and her marriage.
It's not easy as a mom to not know if you're going to be able to feed your kids. Coming home and hearing them say I'm hungry.
Today she has a good job and is renting a home.
I don't live in fear anymore.
Holly's bounced back through her hard work, but she's still angry the banks were bailed out by the government while she struggled on her own.
The government didn't step in and say, hey, we see that you need some help with your mortgage. Here's some help. No, it went to the corporations, the banks, to bail them out. But where was the bailout for the people that were affected? I mean, it literally took me up until this year to get out of debt.
For the generation who grew up with the crisis, the economic future looked uncertain.
I was just so sad and angry, and I just didn't want to be around anyone.
Holly's daughter Skylin is now 24 and a mother to a 5-year-old.
Yeah, she's so cute. I love her so much.
Hey, Dad.
With unemployment rates falling, she's found work, but lives with her dad. Having her own home remains a distant dream for her and many other millennials.
Trying to make your paycheck stretch and, you know, oh, Mommy, I want that lollipop. I can't give it to you because Mommy's got a budget and I got to make this check go as long as I can. I'm sorry, kid, I can't give you that lollipop. It's tough.
It was the worst financial crisis in living memory. Although the data shows the recovery's strong, a decade on, the ripples from that crisis are still being felt far and wide. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Rhode Island.
For days, Russia has claimed it doesn't know the men accused by Britain of being behind a chemical weapons attack. Suddenly today, President Putin said he knows who they are. We'll have a report from Moscow.
And stunning allegations tonight about President Trump. As Trump Tower was being built decades ago, he allegedly tried to get an architect to break the law. We'll explain.
Ahead at 10, a Harvey Weinstein business meeting that allegedly ended in rape. Newly released video from that night.
Toddlers tied up. A father comes home to find his kids and his nieces zip-tied. We'll show you video of what the thieves who did this.
And a clumsy crook's would-be robbery ends in disaster. How he lost his gun and almost lost his pants. That's coming up at 10.
But here at 9, Paul Manafort's second trial is set to begin soon in Washington.
But the Washington Post is reporting that Manafort may be considering a plea deal to avoid all this. KCAL9 Susie Suh is here with the details.
Yeah, and Crystal, Juan, it's still unclear exactly how this is all going to go now. Manafort may be willing to plead guilty as prosecutors continue to get ready for the trial. Today, they filed a list of evidence they would like to present to the jury. With the start of Paul Manafort's second criminal trial just days away, his team is in talks with the special counsel about a possible plea deal, according to the Washington Post. At this point, these are ongoing conversations that may not result in a plea. Either way, it's a sudden shift in strategy for Manafort's defense team, who waved off any such talks at the start of Manafort's Virginia trial in late July.
Feeling good.
Good. Any chance that he may decide to flip and cooperate?
No chance.
But 3 weeks after saying that, Manafort was found guilty on 8 of the 18 charges against him, possibly alerting Manafort's team to the uphill battle they face in the D.C. case, where Manafort is charged with money laundering and failing to file as a foreign agent. If Manafort were to work out a plea deal, it's unclear if he would provide any information about the president, who praised his former campaign chairman after the guilty verdict.
One of the reasons I respect Paul Manafort so much is he went through that trial.
Meanwhile, as the president continues his sustained attacks on the special counsel,
It is a rigged witch hunt. I've said it for a long time.
a new CNN poll shows Robert Mueller's approval rating for handling the Russia investigation now outpaces the approval rating for Donald Trump's handling of it by 20 points. 50 to 30%. That's an improvement for Mueller's team by 3 points since August, and a dip for Donald Trump of 4 points from the same period. The latest poll is the first since Manafort's partial guilty verdict and Michael Cohen's guilty plea. And it suggests the repeated renunciations of Mueller's probe.
I say it again. That whole situation is a rigged witch hunt. It's a totally rigged deal.
Might not be working. Well, jury selection is set for Monday, and the trial is scheduled for later on this month. Juan, Crystal, back to you.
All right, Susie, thanks for that. Meanwhile, President Trump has signed an executive order to prove he's making election meddling a priority. The order will authorize sanctions against foreigners who interfere with U.S. elections. The president has been criticized for not taking threats to U.S. elections seriously. The administration says it's not seeing the intensity of Russian intervention that was experienced in 2016. It says there's also concern over the cyber activities of China, North Korea, and Iran.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says 2 men accused by Britain of attempting to murder former spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia are not criminals. Putin says the men are civilians and has encouraged them to give their version of events. Correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports from Moscow.
Captured on camera, the 2 men accused of a nerve agent attack on the streets of Salisbury. It is a week since British police released these pictures and named their suspects as Russian intelligence agents. A week Russia has spent denying that any of this is evidence. Now, Vladimir Putin has addressed the claims directly. On stage at an economic forum, he announced that the men were no agents, but civilians.
We know who they are. We found them. I hope they'll appear and explain everything. This will be best for everyone. There is nothing special here, nothing criminal, I assure you.
The president's tone matches this. Other officials have been busy mocking the British case as absurd, a soap opera, even claiming that CCTV footage was faked. British police say the suspects' names are likely to be aliases, so it's possible whoever Russia has now found, it's not the men who travelled to Salisbury at all. With these surprise comments, Vladimir Putin has raised the prospect that the suspects in the Salisbury poisoning could appear in public, perhaps very soon. But all along, Moscow has dismissed the allegations coming from London as nonsense. So whatever happens now, it seems unlikely to take the British investigation any further. This former KGB officer told me Russia could be behind the Salisbury attack, that the culprits never expected to be discovered. So behind their public statements, he thinks Russian officials are worried.
All of
the elite understands the mess that Russia is now in. But the leadership sets the tone. They say that the British made it all up, that it's all rubbish. But that's just laddish bravado. Everyone knows that the consequences will be serious.
The poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter has already led to diplomatic expulsions and sanctions. Now all eyes are on Moscow for a first glimpse of the key suspects. But whoever appears, the chances of them facing criminal charges in Britain are as slim as ever. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
The EU is pursuing unprecedented action against the Hungarian government of Prime Minister Viktor Orban. European Union lawmakers voted today in favor of launching a procedure that could lead to the suspension of Hungary's EU voting rights. This is for allegedly undermining the bloc's democratic values and rule of law. Orban is under fire for his anti-migrant policies. Hungary vowed to challenge the action.
The president's tough stance on illegal immigration has not stopped families from crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Border Patrol officers have arrested more families in August than in July. Nearly 16,000 families were stopped at the border. Border officials blame legal loopholes that allow parents and children to avoid immediate deportation. Overall, nearly 47,000 people were arrested or stopped at the border last month. And next at 9, North Korea's dictator is changing his diplomatic strategy as another major U.S. ally seeks a summit. We'll have a report from Pyongyang.
A murder investigation is underway after witnesses say a woman tried to dispose of a man's body in his backyard. We'll have a live report coming up at 10.
And a world-famous LA destination is ruined by a graffiti artist. We'll explain why this LA selfie spot was desecrated.
President Trump has been accused of wanting Braille removed from his Trump Tower design decades ago because the blind were apparently not welcomed there. In a Washington Post report, former VP of Construction Barbara Ress claimed she heard President Trump at the time tell an architect to remove Braille from the elevator design in the 1980s. Ress says the architect resisted and said that would be against the law. In response, President Trump apparently said, "Get rid of the expletive Braille. No blind people are going to live in Trump Tower." The Trump organization did not immediately respond to comment on this report. South Korea and the U.S. have been thawing their relations with North Korea, and Japan may be next. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says he wants to meet with Kim Jong-un in hopes of building peace in the region. Correspondent Will Ripley has more on North Korea's shifting diplomatic strategy.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un waited more than 6 years to make his international diplomatic debut. Now he's getting ready for yet another round. Next week, Kim meets for the third time with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. A fourth meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping is reportedly in the works, and the White House says Kim is seeking a second summit with President Donald Trump after writing the president a personal letter.
It was a very warm, very positive letter.
President Trump praised the North Korean leader for leaving his nuclear missiles out of Sunday's military parade in Pyongyang, reviving stalled diplomacy with the U.S. after Trump abruptly canceled Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's Pyongyang visit last month.
We have some hard work to do. We also have a tremendous opportunity.
Anti-American propaganda has disappeared from the streets of the North Korean capital.
I remember standing in front of this exact poster last year, and it said all of the mainland U.S. is within striking range. Now it's talking about building up a socialist economy. The change in tone in such a short amount of time is just extraordinary.
U.S. intelligence questions whether the North Korean leader is really serious about giving up his nuclear weapons. North Koreans we talked to, with government guides just off camera, say they have no doubts about their supreme leader's sudden diplomatic U-turn.
It seemed like this country was so focused on the nuclear program. To go from that to this, does it seem odd to anyone here, or what do people think about it?
I don't think many local people feel surprised by this sudden turn, says Kim Bong-hyung, because we trust our leader. He's trying to make our lives better. They also tell us they're optimistic about the possible next meeting between Kim and Trump, despite lack of progress on the nuclear issue. The two leaders made a strong commitment, says Ro Kyung-ho, and our marshal has a strong will to keep the promise he made at the summit. Analysts in the U.S. are much more skeptical. Some say it's all a show designed to tamp down the angry rhetoric that had Trump and Kim on the path to war and give North Korea enough breathing room to continue secretly developing weapons. But while Kim's motivation may not be fully apparent yet, what is clear is after nearly 70 years of hostility and hiding, what was once called the Hermit Kingdom is now coming out on the global stage. Will Ripley, Pyongyang, North Korea.
Thanks for watching KCAL9 News at 9. KCAL9 News at 10 starts right now.